In a broader sense, the trend for these companies has been sort of bad to worse, which means, access to their largest potential market, China, has been becoming tighter and tighter, and it's becoming more difficult for them to do business. What they were told was, and this is the US Commerce Department, was actually, look, these licenses, these applications that you've put in for permission to ship some of these chips to China, guess what? We're going to take a positive look at them. So this was really kind of a pleasant surprise if you're a shareholder, where the expectation has been that this situation was going to get worse and worse.
A pleasant surprise and somewhat of an about face, right, when it comes to the presidential administration's policies here. What does this about face really signal about the negotiations going on between China and the U.S. when it comes to semis?
Yeah, I think you nailed it in terms of negotiations, because as we've seen from senior administration officials who've been on our TV and been on other media sort of talking about this issue today, they've said, oh yeah, we sort of made this deal a while ago when we were asking the Chinese to give us access to rare earth minerals and magnets, and we sort of told them that this might be a thing. So what we're kind of learning here is it's clearly a quid pro quo type situation, and obviously implies that going forward, if we're going to see more of these trade type deals, then perhaps AI exports to China are on the table in a way that we thought they perhaps weren't.
At issue are these H20 chips. You mentioned different officials on our air. One of those officials, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he was on Bloomberg surveillance a little earlier today. Here's what he said about those Nvidia H20 chips.
Be a judgment that the Chinese indigenous manufacturers already have an equivalent chip. So, if there's an equivalent chip, then the Nvidia H20 could be sold. One thing that we do not want is a digital Belt and Road springing up around the world because other countries or China are substituting for our American chip manufacturers.
That was Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Bloomberg surveillance earlier. I'll repeat a little bit of what he said. He does not want a digital Belt and Road springing up around the world. That, of course, referring to what China's been able to do physically around the world when it comes to trade, when it comes to ports, when it comes to building roads throughout the entire world, or almost the entire world, much of the developing world, I should say, and exerting its own influence on countries around the world that way. Is there already a digital Belt and Road initiative that China has been exerting on the rest of the world, Ian?
In this particular area, in AI, not yet. But what Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, has argued, and some of his peers have argued, is like, look, if you don't let the US technology become the absolute center, the base layer of this giant AI build out around the world, somebody else will. Who will that somebody be? Most likely China. Right now, they're not as good as we are. Right now, they're way behind us. But guess what? If you give them the chance, they'll catch us up. That's been the kind of, hey, you need to let us be out there and propagate our AI kind of argument that they've made. And this is clearly something that we've seen administration officials kind of parrot or adopt, if you like, in terms of their explanation of why they're going to let Nvidia and AMD sort of play in China to a greater extent than we thought they would.
I'm wondering how this development, well, I guess what it means for U.S. tech and AI companies now versus companies, I'm thinking DeepSeek, in China that are also trying to kind of get ahead in the AI arms race. Does this level the playing field?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's still a very distorted, if you like, situation. US companies are not going to be allowed to sort of absolute free access. The US administration officials were very clear to point out that, hey, we're only letting them have these access to these older chips, right? That nothing new, nothing state-of-the-art is going to be allowed there. So those Chinese companies that are actually developing, they will have access to some, perhaps US technology, but nothing state-of-the-art. So they've kind of got to make their own way still, and that's obviously a hard road.
How are they doing in that?
It depends who you speak to. Those that want to argue for more freedom, that want to argue that the US is at risk, are saying the Chinese are finding a way. Huawei's doing really well. DeepSeek is doing really well, and they're making do and mend with very little. So guess what? If they, over time, they're going to get better. Others are saying, no, they're way behind us here. This is our chance to really hold them back, and the US is forging ahead. So, the argument tends to shift according to who's making it and what the motivations are. What the reality is will be determined by the market and the use of these systems worldwide.
Ian, just 10 seconds on sort of the next question when it comes to what NVIDIA and AMD and the like cannot still export. What is it?
Yeah, I mean, the next question is how many of these licenses are they going to get, and what does that mean materially for them? And the answer is we don't really know yet how quickly these licenses will come, how quickly they'll be able to ship, and how much demand there'll be, whether it'll restore the lost revenue that they've already had to point to.